Welcome to Crossing Faiths. I'm John Pinna, and today we have back Scott Horton, who is a advocate for non-interventionism, as well as has been on the podcast before. We just did a brief recording about a week and a half ago, and today I was having him on to chat a little bit about the Monroe Doctrine and some of what's going on down in Venezuela and in South America and Central America, and how that is related to our global the United States and our global projection, particularly in Eastern Europe and elsewhere. So, welcome back.
Thank you very much for having me. Good to be with you.
Yeah. So let's start off with what is the Monroe Doctrine? Let's talk about that.
Sure.
I mean, Monroe was a president of ours. I think the fourth president, right? Uh,
Yes. James Monroe, he gave a speech. It was his seventh annual message, is what they called it. December the 2nd, 1823.
yeah.
Hey, 202 years ago. And he said in the speech that, quote, we should consider any attempt on the Europeans' part to extend their system to any portion of this hemisphere as dangerous to our peace and safety, the manifestation of an unfriendly disposition toward the United States. Now, the thing about that is what he's really saying in practice was not that all European powers must leave the New World now. But what he was saying was no new colonies. And the
Sure.
United States of America will be the regional hegemon over North and South America, not you. And
Right.
let that be a line in the sand. And if you try it, well, we will consider that to be a mark of your challenge to our power and authority, except this, that, whatever. Now, we're going to get to this part later, but I'm going to go ahead and quote it because it's pretty good. Our policy in regard to Europe is not to interfere in the internal concerns of any of its powers, to consider the government de facto as the legitimate government for us, and to cultivate friendly relations with it.
Right.
So
And so
you
we're
stay
start,
out of our hemisphere and we will
right.
stay out of yours.
And we're
That
on the
was the
heels.
Monroe Doctrine.
You're right. And we're on the heels of the War of 1812, where Washington was burned to the ground. We're on the heels of that. It's in living memory, right? And
Mhm.
so, and there's living memory of obviously the revolution, but we're also, the Spanish Empire is still floating around with, and down in South America, because the Maine doesn't happen until the Rough Riders reformed and Teddy Roosevelt in the turn of the 20th century. So the Spanish influence is still here, and there's still quite a bit of European influence from the colonial era that are still alive and well. And that was something that we were very worried about at that time. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm trying to give a little bit
Yes.
of context. We
Look,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, in 1823, I mean, yes, by then Jefferson had just bought Louisiana, but it was far from settled yet.
Right.
The Spanish were still in Florida. Um, the British were still in Canada, of
Right.
course.
The French were in Mexico. Right.
Yeah. Um, and let's see, were the French in Mexico then?
Well, the Louisiana Purchase was from France, right? And so I'm trying to think of when Mexican independence was. The Battle of San Jacinto was
Well, but that was independence from Spain. I think the French only had dominance in Mexico for a short time during the U.S. Civil War under
okay,
Maximilian. And
right,
then that was when, speaking of the Monroe Doctrine, after the end of the Civil War,
right,
Andrew Johnson, who succeeded Abraham Lincoln, told the French, like he sent, I think it was 10 or maybe it was 50,000 troops to the border. That's in here somewhere. Oh, I have it right here. He sent
yes.
50,000
So I
troops to
apologize
the
for
border.
misquoting that.
It's in my book. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, he sent 50,000 troops to the border and he told the French, pack it up and go home. You are no longer dominant in Mexico. And they gave in without a fight. And they
right.
did exactly that. Now, there's more to it than that, but that was basically the story there.
Sure.
Um, but anyway,
I appreciate
so
you
no,
keeping.
but the French were still in French Canada, I guess, like and maybe even let's see, in 1823, were they
Haiti,
still in Ohio? Maybe. No, maybe
right?
not. They might have been driven out of what's now the continental U.S. by then. But anyway, your point still stands that yes, there were European powers everywhere, all over.
Right.
This was a major challenge to them. And now, you know, telling the Europeans to beat it is one thing. And of
Right.
course, again, promising or at least telling them not to expand any further is one thing. And also, again, in parentheses, while promising to stay out of European affairs. Um, but then forcing them out or achieving and maintaining imperial dominance over the Latin American states instead of the European powers is a
Right.
whole other matter. And
Yeah.
usually it's all conflated together, but that's really the Theodore Roosevelt corollary to the
Sure.
Monroe Doctrine that says actually one better. Not only do you got to go, but we're taking over. And I'm paraphrasing that very loosely because I know much less about that and I should have studied up. But um, the Monroe Doctrine itself does not say we have the right to invade any country in Latin America that we feel like. And so if
Right.
people want to say that that's what this is about, hey, Monroe Doctrine,
Right.
James Monroe said we can do whatever we want. And so that destroys all laws and all edicts from God about not killing people and all laws against crime and stealing and any other kind of corruption. James Monroe said, but no, he didn't. And James
Right.
Monroe was just a president a long time ago, and he doesn't have the authority to announce a new doctrine that goes against the Constitution that created his office in the first place. He's just a man. That's why we call him Mr. President, not your Royal Majesty, and pretend he has a mandate from God to do anything over the rights of any other man.
Well, it's an interesting point, right? So you have this. It's not a living document. It's not like the Constitution, which is supposed to be a living document, and it's
Eh,
something else. It's a presidential update about the state of affairs contextually within its time, within its time and space. But if it's been something that's been a big part of our foreign policy, particularly in our hemisphere when it comes to interventionism and in Chile and Peru and so forth. And so the evolution of this document, the evolution of the idea, I guess, behind the document has been really dusted off and utilized for whatever interventionism we wanted this particular time. And in this particular time, this particular moment, we're talking about Venezuela is really active. Where there's a new term that I heard. What was the term? It was narco terrorist, right? So that was the new term that I heard. I don't know if you. And so anything with terrorists on the end of it's bad. We know that, right? Because we've been
right.
heavily socialized. And now they're narco terrorists, which are bad, which means that they're out operating outside of the normal rules of engagement, and we're bombing those boats there. And so maybe we could talk a little bit about, all right, how does this document that's from 1823 transport its way into the present day with Venezuela?
Yeah, it really doesn't. Right. It's just some sloganeering that they invoke or whatever. There's no real law there.
Right.
And they're in violation of the law. Michael Bolden at the 10th Amendment Center is a real expert on this, on the rules of war and who you're allowed to kill on the high seas and how. And you're just not allowed to do this. And I saw yesterday, he had a great thing debunking these claims that there is a law that Senator Schumer helped to author and pass back in the 90s that says they can do this. And Michael Bolden says, well, one, even if it did, that's still wrong. The Constitution supersedes
Sure.
any bogus law like that. But then, two, that's not what the law says at all, man.
Right.
And interdiction doesn't mean you murder somebody with a drone strike.
Right.
Interdiction means the Coast Guard pulls them over, which is what they always do.
Sure.
And as Senator Rand Paul has pointed out numerous times, when they suspect that a boat is a drug smuggling boat and they pull them over, 1/5 of the time, that is 20% of the time,
Sure.
they're wrong
Wrong. Yeah.
and the innocent go free.
Right.
Oops. Boy, it sure looked like, man, you guys really shouldn't pack your fish in square taped bundles like that. Sure looks like cocaine from the sky, dum dum. But meanwhile, no, it's really just fish in there or whatever it is.
Right.
And so, look, and Susie Wiles, the chief of staff to Donald Trump, she admitted that this is essentially just attempting to achieve a regime change against Maduro. It has nothing to do with drugs. Venezuela is not a source of drugs that Americans consume. All that stuff comes from the West Coast. All the cocaine comes from the West Coast over in Peru and Colombia. And then, or I guess, yeah, Colombia is, yeah,
Well,
they're
Columbia
West
straddles
Coast.
both coasts. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean, I always have to remind myself exactly where Central America connects. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It is on the western side.
Yeah.
But
And
but anyway, you know what I mean.
it bisects Columbia, so it's on both. So you
Sure.
get away
Yeah.
with it. Yeah.
Um,
So.
But so anyway, but it's just, it ain't coming from Venezuela. And that doesn't mean the Maduro regime is not corrupt. And perhaps they're into some drug running, but not to the United States. And
Right.
certainly not the fentanyl crisis that's literally destroying American communities like
Yeah.
bombs. It's just horrific. All that is coming, Chinese chemicals processed in Mexico. So
Right.
it's clearly nothing but a pretext. And, there's an anonymous Twitter account who had this thing that I thought was smart that my partner, Daryl Cooper, pointed out to me. We do a show together, me and Daryl. And it was about how, look, Maduro does smuggle drugs in the Caribbean, and he needs that revenue to pay off his guys, just as he needs to be able to sell oil on the gray market, not really black market. Just because America puts sanctions on you doesn't mean you're really breaking the law to sell oil, but they're getting around it and they're selling oil at discounts to Cuba or whoever they can. And that he needs that money, and that what Trump is trying to do is basically just squeeze him till the point that he gives up. And now it used to be a very sound argument that sanctions don't work. They just empower the ruler and his men over everyone else even more. All the people, like in the case of Iraq in the 1990s, you say you're trying to, they said explicitly, they're trying to they're trying to make the people of Iraq so miserable that they would rise up and overthrow Saddam Hussein, even though in fact, he was keeping all the money he needed for his mukbarat, and they had less and less power to oppose him all the time,
Right.
right? And they had their big chance in 91, and Bush Sr. encouraged it and then stabbed him in the back and let Saddam kill them all, crush 100,000. They had no ability to rise up then. So the sanctions war against Iraq was only empowering Saddam versus his own population, right? Great argument. But the Syria example from last year now destroys that. In
Right.
the case of Syria, they supported a bin Ladenite jihadi war, even to the point that it led to the caliphate that then they had to go destroy again back in 2013, 14 through 17 there. But the survivors of the bin Ladenite movement there, they hold up in the Idlib province, safe and sound under Turkish and de facto American protection, all through the end of the Obama years,
Sure.
and well, really through the beginning of Trump,
Trump.
and through the end of Biden, where 1 year ago they broke out of their pen in an October 7th type fashion and sacked Damascus. And the
Yeah.
reason they were able to do that is because one, Russia's distracted in Ukraine and so can't be there to back them up. Funny how the Hawks, arranged that. And Hezbollah, of course, had gotten their ass whooped in airstrikes and the pager attack and had lost their charismatic leader, Nasrallah, and all of that in their recent war with Israel. So they were nowhere to help. And Iran, they sent weapons and advisors back 15 to 10 years ago in the Obama years there.
Right.
But they never sent ground forces to really fight the war on Assad's behalf the way Nasrallah did, in fact, right back then.
Right.
So after this massive sanctions regime, and with American troops occupying eastern Syria and keeping the wheat and the oil out of the hands of the Damascus government,
Right.
and severely weakening not just the entire population, which, yes, it did, but also the leader himself, completely corrupted every last vestige of his government. There's no operating principle there among the men running the regime except to survive themselves. And so they were ripe for the overthrow, and it worked. Assad was overthrown. Al Qaeda essentially just walked right in to
Yeah.
Damascus. Now, Marco Rubio presumably is telling Trump, that's what we can do here. We can just, as long as we can cut off drug revenue and oil revenue, this guy's days are numbered, and not even in months, but in weeks. And he'll have to go. And I don't necessarily know that that's true or that it ain't, quite frankly. You know what I mean? There could be some general who'd be perfectly happy to shoot
Yeah.
Maduro in the back of the head. What do I know? But
Yeah.
that
It's
seems
tough.
to be the strategy that they're going with now. But they have a massive naval armada, blockading all oil shipments from there, and they've closed the airspace to all
Yeah.
commercial traffic. So that is, I guess they can, on our dime, afford to maintain that for a while. And unlike W. Bush, I will say, this is not like W. Bush is building up in Kuwait and there's no way he's backing down now,
Right.
right? This is not that. So, and in fact, I've read that Trump talks to Maduro, or at least the White House talks to Maduro and his people somewhat regularly. where apparently they demand his unconditional surrender, meaning step down, and he'll do everything but that. And remember, Trump said a few weeks ago, he said that Maduro has offered everything. Now, he said the F word, which got all the attention. He said, because he knows not to F with the United States of America. But the sentence before that was, he's offered everything. He's already completely bowed down. Mineral rights, you got them.
Right.
Don't shoot. Right. And Trump's saying, not good enough. You got to go. And then
It's
one more thing about that is, I don't really know this, but I read a great analyst who, this is his theory, and I like it. It's Brad Pierce, the Wayward Rabbler, is a very smart guy. And he wrote a thing saying what's really happening here is it's the Florida man occupied government. And this is, Marco Rubio and the whole culture of the White House, not just him, but a lot of these guys, and especially are now Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. Marco Rubio, first guy to hold both posts at the same time since Kissinger, right? And he is, for all of his faults, Marco Rubio hates communists. Well, God bless him for that, right?
right.
But it ain't just that he hates them, it's that he wants something done about it. And he now is in this incredibly powerful position. And this is his chance to force a regime change in Venezuela. And then the idea would be that if Venezuela's not there to help prop up what's left of the Castroist regime in Cuba, then it will fall too. And then presumably, hopefully, without war. But then potentially, I mean, they sure are throwing down the gauntlet here. I guess I should say, if Maduro does refuse to go, and Trump does just have to give up and sail home with his tail between his legs, he ain't quite W. Bush building up in Kuwait, but there's a taste of that in there, right? There's a bit of that in there, where if he fails to achieve his goals here, that's backing down quite a way compared to, say, when they did the Juan Guaido coup in his first term, and the thing fell apart, and Trump's like, I don't know, John Bolton, you said it was going to work and it didn't, so what am I going to do? In this case, he's really stuck his neck all the way out there much more on achieving some kind of a positive outcome here in terms of, apparently the gauntlet is regime change. Maduro, if not the whole government, Maduro himself must step down from power. Seems to be, I don't know that explicitly, but that seems to be the goal that they will not settle for less than.
So what's the so what now? Let's just say he does step down. So that the idea is that it's all about petrol, right? So like my government contacts, there's there at the end of the Trump 1.0, Venezuela was part of the conversation. I was brought into a few of the conversations. I go, it's not my circus, it's not my monkeys. I don't know South America, it's not my world. I mean, I've done some work down that way, but never in Venezuela. And dealt with FARC a little bit, and the guerrillas in Colombia, in the southern part of Colombia. But that's a whole different story. But I never had touched anything when it comes to Venezuela aside from that. And I go, but there was a so they thought they were going to win the election. So I remember the last couple months from the summer of the July. It was July of 20. What was it, 2020, 2019? There was conversations about Venezuela, and they were bringing people into the administration that were involved in Venezuelan politics. I mean, one of the guys that I knew, he was married to a Venezuelan, so they hated Venezuela, right? And so because of what happened to our family. And so, and there was a lot of these strange briefings going on. So from my perspective, I'm like, oh, this is just a resurgence of what they were, of the conversations that happened, and those people that they embedded in the government that sat for 4 years and then kind of, there's the idea of, there's petrol, right? There's one of the largest oil producer, or has the potential of being the largest oil producer in the world. We have the Monroe Doctrine, which says that we can intervene wherever we want. We talked a little bit about whether that's valid or not, and then on top of that, we go, well, what happens if there is regime change? Like, what's the so what and what now? It's like right now we're dealing with Syria, and we're dealing with jihadists who may or may not be willing to play the game with us, who sound like they were saying everything correct, saying everything we want to hear. But when it comes to something like what's going to happen in Venezuela, they're really my experience with regime change with the American government, the U.S. government, and in my career of national security is that always when we do regime change, we never do it right, because we're never thinking about how we're going to institute the next form of government and how it's going to run efficiently, and really how is it going to serve the American people or strengthen the republic if all this stuff with the Monroe Doctrine we buy into. What would be your take on that? Like, what would be the so what now, and what would be the value of how to of this turning into something that would be strengthened in the republic? Or I know you're not an interventionist, so I know this is a loaded question.
Well, look, I mean, I mean, as far as business goes, there was this giant thing in the New York Times in October about how Chevron has gotten along with Venezuela this whole time. And I
Yeah.
know Citco did for a very long time anyway. And Chevron, they had a guy on their board of directors, according to the Times, who was close to Hugo Chavez. And he said, everybody get the hell out, except you, Chevron, you can stay. And so they had this ongoing relationship this whole time. And if you Google, American oil companies' names and Venezuela in Google News and go back, mostly what you find is Chevron urging whichever government to lighten up on the sanctions and don't disrupt trade and what we have going on and the good that we are getting out of our relationship with Venezuela. Now, there's a theory because there's I guess, a new gas field offshore that they'd have to split with Colombia, and Maduro is a pain, and Exxon wants in on that. And there are some who think that has a lot to do with this. Harrison Berger wrote a thing for the American Conservative magazine about how Exxon backs, I think it was the Center for Science and International Security, which is a big hawkish think tank in Washington, and that they
Yeah.
have published a big thing about we need regime change now, and there seemed to be causation of that correlation to him. On the other hand, I got an email from a guy who I recognized him as like a longtime follower on Twitter and stuff. And he goes, hey, look, just so you know, I work for Exxon, and that's not what's going on here. We don't fight with Chevron like that. We don't do power plays like this in that
Right.
kind of a way. And at these prices, are you kidding? I mean, that it's very heavy Venezuelan crude. It's very expensive to
Yeah, refined.
extract and refine. And so now I guess a war would drive up prices high enough, but they got an interest in Trump just was bragging about how oil prices are lower, not higher. So, you know what I mean? They don't want to, probably blow that up. So I don't really know. As far as I know, that has nothing to do with it, honestly. Right. And that, whoever comes next, the oil companies, as they almost always do, I think, will let Uncle Sam drive and hopefully pick a guy who will do business with them in a more open way. They can lift their sanctions and get back to business. It seems to be like, I don't know how you rank this. I don't know how anyone knows. If you have a friend in the State Department who could tell you that, I'd be very interested to know. But there is an anti-Zionist component to Maduro's communism and, leftistness there. And he's cozied up to Ayatollah, and apparently Hezbollah has at least some presence down there. I'm sure it's embellished, but
It's an
that
interesting take.
must play some factor in the motivation for war here, even though Israel is not a state in the Union, as you might have noticed. But just like Saddam Hussein paid the families of Hamas suicide bombers, and that was a big reason the neocons wanted America to get rid of Saddam Hussein for Israel. It's the same kind of thing here, where, hey, if Venezuela is not good for Israel, then America must do something about it. You don't even have any actual card-carrying neoconservatives in this administration right now. You realize that?
Yeah.
4 years ago, 8 years ago, you had Elliot Abrams, right? Norman
Right.
Podhoret's son-in-law was up there getting work done. Bill Kristol's brother-in-law, right?
Right.
Where Bill Kristol's leading the anti-Trump brigades. His brother-in-law works for Trump trying to engineer a regime change in Venezuela. Well, but that's over. There are no actual ass neocons in the government right now, but
Right.
whatever. Rubio might as well be. And they all might as well be. Trump himself might as well be a Trotsky con at this point. He's such a Zionist. He's the worst Zionist since Truman.
That's an interesting take. I mean, I remember it was 2017. I said 2017. It was 2017, 2018, 2017, and I know it was 2018. It was the autumn of 2018. And I remember government called me up and they said we need you to get to Brussels. And I go, okay. I said, what's going on? They go, well, something's happening with the DRC. And I go, oh, okay. So
Wait,
Kabila,
who are you again?
what's that?
I said, who are you again?
I'm just a guy. I'm just a guy. I'm just a government relations guy.
Wait,
And
what was your old job?
so I've worked for my entire career for NGOs funded by the United States. So yeah, and so by aid, state commerce, and I've been a government relations advisor for most of my career. So on national security issues, mostly Asia, east of the Urals, and then south capped at India. I never went into India, and then the Middle East. But every once in a while, I would go down to like South America and stuff.
Yeah.
But
I think I need to subscribe to your podcast. Have you written a book?
I
Have you
haven't.
written a book
I
or
haven't.
something?
We talked about that. We talked about.
I'm sorry. I got
No,
Joe Biden brain these days. I
no, it's
remember what I
okay.
read 30 years ago, not what we talked about 5 minutes ago.
No, it's okay. It's all right. And so the chat. So like I, the one of the core ways in which the U.S. government works is that we have NGOs, and NGOs funded by agencies, and those people in NGOs are able to go pull what's called double booty, right? So you're doing human rights work, you're doing development work, you're providing social worth, there might be ROI, but most of it's cost benefit analysis, right? For U.S. foreign policy, soft diplomacy, and stuff like that. But then you're doing something else, right? While you're doing it, and and I've worked with the U.S. military and the IC for most of my career. So the challenge is that I remember us going and saying I had to get in a plane and go to Brussels. So I get in a plane and go to Brussels, and we're chatting, and sure enough, they were talking about regime change in the DRC, and I'm like, why am I here? And so and one of the guys I was chatting with, or with the guy that sent me there goes, you just wait. And sure enough, you had all this sort of government in exile and all these other people. And then I don't know if you know Christian Malanga, the guy that actually was just killed about a year or two ago in the DRC in Kinshasa, who walked into the Capitol building and was able to at least get that far before they killed him. He was there, and there was a bunch of people there for regime change. And I'm sitting there, oh gosh, okay. Two people walk in, and the two people that walk in, Colonel Z and a guy by the name of Doug, walk in, and I see them, and they look at me, and I go, oh my God, because those are the guys that are kinetic. Those are the guys that if you want regime change, and if you turn around and said, I don't know, I know you're somewhere in Texas, but if you said, I wanted you to hold 4 city blocks in Austin, Texas for 6 months, they would say, Venmo me this amount of money or transfer this amount of money and we'll do it. They're kinetic, So like when they walked in, I go, oh my God. And I know them from Bosnia. So I go, so they're across the table. They're speaking, and one guy's Canadian, so he's speaking French, retired military guy. And so they did this whole speech, and everybody goes, I've got my passport and I'm going to Kinshasa. I'll see you in Kinshasa. So that night, everybody went to the hotel, and I'm just eyes and ears, and I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, a guy in jeans and an M65 jacket walks in, and I know him from a con op in Las Vegas. And this guy walks over, and I look at him, and he looks at me. He walks right past me, starts talking to Christian Malanga, and then I go over and chat with him, and they go, "What are you doing here?" He goes, "We're very interested in what's going on here." And I go, "Huh?" I go, "What's your interest?" And they go, "There's a lot of Lebanese down there," and he was Mossad. And he goes, there's a lot of Lebanese in the DRC. A lot of money goes from A to B, and we're very concerned about this. And so we're involved. And I go, so I turned around I called Washington, and I said right to them, this is horseshit. I go, Mossad's involved. This whole thing's going to go tits up because they don't care if the operation is going to move or not move. I have no pony in the race. What do you want me to do? And they turned around and said, we want you to be there and figure out what's going on. Meanwhile, this ended up being like this was a Trump 1.0 agenda item that was run through Nikki Haley's office. She wanted regime change in the DRC. No one knew why. They were backing Christian Malanga to do it. There were proxy NATO mercs that were involved in helping organize the military and the military components of this. These were all sort of like deposed people from the previous regime, and they actually ran a military op. Well, the military op they were running out of the Republic of Congo in the north. They crossed the river, and it was an ambush, and all the guys got killed. This was in 2018. The challenge is that, and all the guys that were in the staging area ended up in African prisons and all kinds of other stuff. But what did happen? What in this op? What did happen is that while this was going on and Kabila had committed forces, the Mossad had been in the DRC, and they had been rounding up and taking care of whatever it is they needed to take care of, and those Lebanese elements were neutralized, and so there was mission accomplished from a perspective of whatever the Israelis were going after happened. And when I after I came back and I was trying to figure out what, like, why would you send me here? Why would you put me in this position? And they said, look, it doesn't, none of this matters. Our ally is happy, and that's good. And I go, are we and very careful about science. I was like, we're serving our ally, but how is that serving us? And so all these, and not to mention, all these deposed people that from the previous regime, the pre-Kabila regime, were murdered. Basically, they were sent into harm's way, and regardless of their politics and everything else. And so this proxy type stuff happens all the time. So when you're talking about how petrol's not maybe a motivator of Venezuela, which is what's in the news, and that's something that's really there. And then we have the Monroe Doctrine, where we should sort of blindly just intervene in South America because we don't want anybody else to, or whoever's there is not somebody that we agree with. And then you bring up this sort of Israeli element of it, and it kind of screams of that. Is there something Israeli related to this? Is it a backdoor into hurting the Iranian regime, or are there elements there that help fund elements of Hezbollah or Al Shabaab or whomever? And that seems very, very interesting because of the character of this administration, and it kind of feels like that. I'm a regime change guy, so usually
you might have noticed, that like the new lady Machado that they're trying to put in there, that she has explicitly sucked up to Netanyahu and the Israeli government and swore that, under her, there will be no better friend to Israel than Venezuela. And the first thing she'll do is move the embassy to Jerusalem and all of this stuff. So,
I mean, that's an interesting take.
At the very least, she knows that's how to get things done in Washington, is get the Israel lobby on your side. You know what I mean? Like exactly how the nexus of power and conspiracy of interest come together. I don't know. And by the way, which, on the oil thing, there's no question that American imperial policy around the world is greatly centered on hydrocarbons and access to them, and denying access to them to others. And that's a huge part of our Middle East policy and our Caspian policy and Eastern Asia and all of these things. China's just right on the other side of Kazakhstan from the Caspian Basin, right? If you want to go that way, all of this is all very crucial to them. Now, obviously, American oil companies, they like money, and they're perfectly happy to build a pipeline here, a pipeline there, and pump that oil, pump that gas, do whatever they can. But in my understanding, especially in the research I've done, and I have a few books on this subject, by the way, that I have not read yet, that are sitting on my pile demanding to be consumed soon here. But from the reading that I did, especially about the Caspian Basin stuff, for my last book about the Cold War with Russia, and from all of my readings about the Middle East policy, really, even in the post-Cold War era, obviously, Exxon is right there. It's the biggest, most powerful corporation in world history, right? Standard Oil of New Jersey, the Rockefeller flagship oil company, in its day, and really was the State Department before the State Department. They built the State Department on Exxon's, network and skeleton across the world after World War II. The State Department, the embassy would be in the Standard Oil offices and whatever, right? This is a huge corporation. They have major interests. However, it really looks like they often lose when they want the policy to be this way or that way. What happens is the Joint Staff at the Pentagon has a different idea, or the neoconservatives who serve Israel only have a different idea. So where even the Rockefellers have to say, okay, well, fine. And one example of this, or I don't even know if it's the Rockefellers anymore, whatever, even Exxon has to just go along with the Pentagon. And one example of this was the oil companies, and maybe I shouldn't single out Exxon here because I don't know if they were good on this or not. But overall, the American oil companies wanted to stick as many straws in the Caspian Basin as they could and suck it out as many directions as they could and make money. And that included even Alexander Haig and Zbigniew Brzezinski and Dick Cheney, demanding that America build oil pipelines across Iran and let them make some money. We'll normalize relations with them and we'll
Yeah.
all make money together and all this. That was overruled by the Israel lobby. The Israel lobby said, no, you can't include Iran. So no, through the whole 1990s, the Likud overruled Halliburton and
Yeah.
overruled, Chevron and Exxon and those that wanted to do business there. And Uncle Sam instead, the Clinton administration said, no, instead, we're going to build the BTC pipeline from Baku, Azerbaijan, through to Tbilisi, Georgia,
Yeah.
through to Jayan, Turkey. And then that way, the pipeline goes essentially due west and avoids going through Iran or Russia. We
Yeah.
got to cut them out. That was the whole point of it. Um, and yet that meant building a much longer, much more expensive pipeline. And
Yeah.
so the oil companies were like, well, whatever, man, if that's what you guys want to do, but you got to help us pay for the pipeline, man, because we could
Sure.
build a lot shorter one across Iran.
Yeah.
But you can see why, from Houston's point of view, they don't give a damn about the Ayatollah. They can do
Right.
business with the Ayatollah. Hey, if British Petroleum can do business with the Ayatollah, then
Yeah.
U.S. Petroleum can do business with the Ayatollah. It's just that the Israel lobby says no and win over, somehow BP won over the Israel lobby in the UK back 20 years ago. And I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
they're still there. But so anyway, it just looks to me like the oil companies, they are maybe riding shotgun or riding along in the back seat on all this policy, but it doesn't seem to me like they really drive much of it, you know?
Yeah, I mean it's something that's in the news, and we like it started this off with the Monroe Doctrine. It's interesting to talk about how this interventionism is driven by, possibly, but driven by the Israelis and their, paranoia of supporters of the enemies of their state. And so, it's really way out though. I mean, Venezuela, I mean, I understand they have petrol money and I understand that stuff like that, but
You know
and
what?
I
Think
understand.
back though. Think back on all the propaganda about Hezbollah in Venezuela over the years. I always mostly just dismissed all that. There's always some Newsmax crank on about that. But you know what? That's been a pretty powerful Israeli narrative for many years in a row now, isn't it? And
Well, I mean,
there are some people very invested in that.
yeah, I mean, the biggest counterterrorism, agenda, at least from a national security perspective that I know of, has been Argentina. So that's the hotbed. That's where there were training camps. There's all kinds of other things going on there, black markets. The problem is like at Venezuela, it's never been in a briefing document that I've seen, never. Um, as far as terrorism, I mean, there might be, there might be a bunch of Hezbollah executives that are having vacation in Venezuela because they're friendly, but that does not that's far and a cry away from, a command and control and an operational group ready to do something.
Sure. I mean, they're
A
basically just running drugs and sending money home. If you remember back
lot of futzing around with that. Yeah, yeah,
in the Obama years, was it 2013? There was the fake plot for Hezbollah to kill the Saudi foreign minister at a restaurant in Washington. Remember that? And it
yes,
turned out it was total BS.
yeah,
It was a Corpus Christi used car dealer
yeah,
who had been busted on the phone with Iranian and Hezbollah contacts dealing drugs.
yeah,
And he was a kook. Like, part of the story was he couldn't find his car keys, so he was late to the big meeting and all this kind of thing. This was our supposed assassin. And meanwhile, the victim is not even a member of the royal family. He was
right,
like some low-level guy who the supposed intended target, who would have made no sense to murder him at all. The whole thing was obviously cooked up, but it wasn't cooked out of nothing. It was sort of like the plot against H.W. Bush in 1993 in Kuwait. It was based on something, in that case, a whiskey smuggling ring. In this case, apparently cocaine or opiate smuggling ring, because they were trying to bring in some heroin or something. And then they built that up into this assassination plot. So there seems to be, and whatever, obviously, there in the world, there is a massive black market in money laundering and drugs and terrorism, and that
sure.
the biggest institutions are all in on too, and they need that liquid cash for hiring people to kill people when they need them killed sometimes. You know how it goes.
Yeah, and well, and then people just want, and people also want to buy nice things. That's the problem. Most of these
Yeah.
terrorists, like I've sat in some of these conversations, and I'm like, well, what's happening with the money? And of course, they're building a house in Crete. They're building, not as an operational center. They're trying to get towards retirement. these guys don't think they're terrorists. They think they're businessmen. So that's the other thing. It's like, what exactly is happening here? Not saying that we should allow all these things, but there was a lot of money play between Kabila and in the DRC and Korea with Kim Jong Un's sister, and so there's a strong relationship there, and that was a whole another conversation. And I go, and Korea's not my world, so I was like, I don't know what's happening in North Korea. I mean, their constitution's fantastic, but I don't think that they're practicing that in form, in function. I don't know if you ever read.
That's funny. I never read it. I bet it's right.
If you read their constitution, like, you would say this is a paradise. It's the religious freedom, and just if you Google it, you pull it up, and you'll sit there and go, this is fantastic. But none of it means anything. But the point is that there was there. I remember a conversation talking about North Korea and Kabila with these Lebanese, and I remember speaking with some of the Israeli security forces about this stuff, and I go, how do we, I mean, what's the connection here? I go, if you guys are going after Lebanese, like, so there's a there, I get it. There's connected to Hezbollah, they're connected to the enemies of the state. You guys are an ally, great. Whatever it is you want to do, fine. But now you're talking about North Korea and going, how do you even prove something? They're in the same room, they're in the same ballpark, maybe even the same neighborhood, but that doesn't mean that they're transacting an anti-Israeli agenda, which means that we got to get involved, right? So that's the problem. And so there's all these, it's like, well, why don't we do this? And so it appears, if this is something that's tied to an Israeli national security issue, if it's why don't we do this, and then put this person in charge who's friendly with Israel, the administration is biting on that, which is peculiar. But you also have Rubio, who, something interesting is happening in the Trump administration, is that they're eliminating all these positions. So Rubio is running the Department of State like a congressperson. So you'll have all the assistant secretaries. Most of them are very, very young, who don't have, or who you'd be shocked at their resume as being an assistant secretary. And so they've all been appointed, they've been approved, right? They're there, and he's running it like a congressional office where you just have staff, and he's the one guy in charge, and then consolidating all of these job descriptions and responsibilities around one individual or a group of individuals, right? So, for example, there was a special envoy for Tibetan affairs, right? That's now not a person. An individual person, that's now under an assistant secretary under the J secretary line. And so you have one person that has all these job titles, but they can't possibly address all these issues, right? And then on top of that, you have another layer where Rubio is running this like a congressional office, where you have your staff can't make any decisions without Rubio approving it, right? Even if you're an assistant secretary. And then he has this crossover into the NSC, where as a national security advisor type of role, right, where now he's wearing two major hats. On top of that, he's got these large responsibilities, Department of State, and on top of that, it was absorbed AID, USAID. So it's a really strange consolidation of government, which I know you're not for big government, but these titles, these special envoys, these positions are congressionally approved and also have functions and become eyes and ears and become part of a brain trust. And without their existence, the mission associated with the position drops, as well as you don't have a brain trust to consult on someone who's actually dealing with specificity with the Tibetans, for example, and the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan government in exile. And so these decisions can be made, I don't know, in a slipshod manner without being consulted on in a thoughtful and meaningful way tied to our national security interests or the interests of international development and so forth. So it's really peculiar that's what's going on. So it's like hard for us to, and it's an interesting conversation, us trying to figure out the why, because I'm in medium orbit with the Trump administration right now. I'm really retired, and I weigh in on some issues and get called into meetings. But in the first 6 months, I was close in orbit. Now I'm pretty far, like medium orbit. But when it comes to Venezuela, I'm not sure what's going on. But it appears that there's decisions being made, and who's driving those decisions. If the Israelis are saying we want to do this, and there's no anybody else in the room to say, well, maybe we shouldn't do that because of this, this, and this. It's good that's gonna the needle's gonna move on interventionism in Venezuela.
Yeah, man. Look, I have to say, I think I already did, but I'll reiterate. I don't know what the hell's going on either. I don't know what the real motive is, other than the obvious that they just hate these commies and want rid of them, and they think that this is their chance. And then you can kind of come up with a laundry list of things that they hate about these commies, including that they're independent from the United States, including that they pal around with Iran or whatever it is that they want to list about them. But um,
Right.
I don't know that it really just comes down to they think that now's their chance to get rid of somebody they've wanted to get rid of for a very long time. Um, and at the same time, then, but that also translates to, so then I don't have a very good insight into what's going to happen either. I mean,
Right.
they'd be insane to put troops on the ground and try to fight a war there. But then
Yeah.
again, what are the chances that they can just zap Maduro with a drone and he'll just be gone,
Well, they can.
regime change accomplished, or pay off one general who's just going to cap him and remove him, and
Yeah.
then everything's going to work out after that, and it's just going to be great. Like, what are the chances of any of that coming true in that kind of a way? The next mustache in line comes and takes power, and they tell him, "All right, now do what you're told," and he says, "Of course, sir, whatever you say now." And then everything is totally cool, and the new government in Caracas does whatever Washington wants from now on. I don't know. And then the New York Times had that piece, I'm sure you saw a couple of months ago, about the different options. Well, we could try to zap them with a drone, or we could try to send in special operations forces, or we could try to do a full scale invasion.
Right.
Look at Iraq. They tried to zap Saddam Hussein on the
Yeah.
first night of the war in 2003, in March 2003, at the Doha Farms, and they just killed a bunch of women and children, and he got away. They didn't catch him for a year and a half.
Yeah.
After the occupation, and already more than 1,000 Americans killed by the time they caught him, right? And so, and who knows how many tens of thousands of Iraqis by that time. So
Yeah.
there's every reason to, one, not have any idea what the hell they're going to do, or really exactly why they're doing it. Um, or two, just how bad it could be if they really try to go all the way. But I don't think, if you accept the premise that they're going to do something, then I would say warn against the worst kind of consequences. The chances that, unlike Iraq and Afghanistan and Pakistan and Yemen and Syria and Somalia, that this one is going to work out just like we wanted it to, are very, very low. And
Right.
the
Yeah.
idea that anyone, just regular people, would jump on board for another intervention just because dear leader says so, speaking of North Korea, is just tragic. Oh, I guess you just like them selling drugs to our kids. I mean, I see that stuff on Twitter. People say
Right.
that to me. Oh, yeah, no, we have to have a war with Venezuela to prevent your kid from getting high. Boy, are you a lousy parent, scumbag.
Right. Well,
Jesus.
well, I
Like,
think
oh, all of a sudden you have the right to kill people, huh? You have the right to do whatever you want because of drug addiction. Oh, please. And by the way, I think we already talked about, the fentanyl doesn't come through there, but
yeah.
whatever cocaine comes to the United States from Venezuela, if any at all, can we be really, really honest about who does cocaine in this country?
Right.
Republicans do
Yeah.
cocaine because Republicans can afford cocaine.
Right.
Okay. That's who does cocaine. Rich people who want to stay up late so they can drink longer and have more sex. And they
Right.
don't die from it. And they don't corrupt little children with it. And it is not a problem in the United States of America unless your very rich friend gets strung out on cocaine, which is his problem,
Right.
not mine. Legalize it and stop crying about it. Give me a break.
Yeah. No, I think that the rattling sabers for an anti-drug situation. I mean, you and I are old enough to know about the war on drugs in the '80s and where that got us.
And in the 90s, remember,
Yeah.
before they could invent the war on terrorism, they needed a stand in for the Soviet Union. So it
Yeah.
became, we're going to send Harrison Ford down there to stop the cocaine cartels, everybody. And they kept militarism going for an extra decade
Yeah.
until they could get around to getting 9/11 done and have a new excuse to go to the Middle East instead.
Yeah.
And
No.
now they want to do that again. Oh,
Yeah.
look, everybody, an enemy to pretend to be afraid of. USA, we're number one, the global superpower, and yet always terrified, always at threat. This complex of fear and vaunting, as Garrett Garrett called it, Whatever will we do if we don't conquer everyone everywhere before they get us?
I know it's such an interesting interesting element behind this. I mean, and here's the other side of it is that we have, was it Maduro's been said to us, he'll do whatever we want, sort of stepping down, right?
Right.
So there's a diplomatic path here that no one's taking advantage of. Like Rubio, Secretary of State, is not taking advantage of what could be good to let's pretend that you and I are in the government right now, and let's just pretend we're advocates for the NSS, the National Security Strategy. To strengthen the republic, getting oil would be great. Mineral rights would be great. To getting a port in the northern part of South America would be great. Stopping this interaction, the constant war that's been going on between Colombia and Venezuela, that'd be great. These are all things that would be assets to strengthen the republic if a diplomatic course was taken, and we actually started interacting and having conversations, with serious conversations about a diplomatic solution.
Look, I totally agree with that. And quite frankly, and I don't care if this sounds like some kind of utopian claptrap or whatever, it's just not. When the Soviet Union fell, the United States of America could have just killed the whole world with kindness this whole time. We didn't have to do any of this militarism at all. We don't have to have a State Department or a Pentagon at all. The Pentagon should have been renamed the Department of War and put back in the office building just adjacent to the White House, like back before World War II, because, and we're going to turn the Pentagon into a library like the great dictator Roosevelt promised back when he built the thing in the 1940s. And then we could just have a Ron Paulian policy of, tell me where you heard this one before, peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none. So if the British and the Israelis want to go and have a world empire, let them work that out for themselves. We're not paying their way. And as you said, we could have a port. We could have a commercial port and open and friendly relations with Venezuela. We don't need a naval base in Venezuela. Who do we got to fend off? The sharks? We don't have to have a world empire. Spin the globe. You've been around it yourself. We have no enemies. There are no powers that exist in Latin America or Africa. Every single nation in Europe is our friend, including Russia 2/3 of the time. Like, when they use Ukrainian motors to launch American astronauts into space, like they did a couple of weeks ago. Right? The Chinese have been our friends for 50 years. Nixon and Kissinger went over there 50 years ago. India is a basket case. They got H-bombs, but they're not threatening us in any way. They're friends of ours, no danger to the United States or our even hegemony in Asia, much less our safety and independence here in the United States. And then that's it. You just spun the whole globe and now you're back again. There are no powers. As Bill Hicks announced to the world in 1992, it's all a lie. We have no enemies. We're the enemy. USA is now the evil empire. We don't have, just look, Strobe Talbot, the guy who took the lead in expanding NATO, the guy who took the lead in screwing the Russians in the Caspian, is the same guy who said we should not do that. We should not do that. Why do we have to screw the Russians in the Caspian? Let them have a pipeline. We're going to back suicide bombers in Chechnya just to prevent the Russians from having a pipeline through there, through Dagestan, or reopening the old one or building a new one through Dagestan. We're going to commit high treason on behalf of the bin Ladenites to prevent the Russians from pumping hydrocarbons. Hey, guess what? It didn't have to go that way at all. Strobe Talbot was right the first time, and Bill Clinton was guilty of high treason, backing those same terrorists who were already attacking the United States. And remember, why was Colleen Rowley and the Minneapolis FBI office unable to connect Zacarias Moussaoui to the hijackers who did 9/11? It was because the FBI said, no, no, no. He's tied to the terrorists in Chechnya, but we like the terrorists in Chechnya. They're not bin Ladenite suicide bomber head chopper terrorists. No, they're nationalist freedom fighters, and we love them. And so, no, you may not have your FISA warrant, which would have led to the papers that would have led directly to the leaders of the Hamburg cell hijacker pilot hijackers in Florida and could have stopped September 11th. But they were willing to commit this treason on behalf of bin Laden, just as long as they're killing Russians. just as
Yeah.
long as they're killing Serbs, as you know, right now in front of all of our eyes, just as long as they're killing Shiites and Alawites and preventing Iran from helping Hezbollah by way of Syria. We don't have to do any of this. We didn't have to do Iraq War II. We didn't even have to do Afghanistan. The Taliban were perfectly willing to negotiate over Osama bin Laden. They
Oh
lied
yeah.
that that wasn't the case.
Oh yeah.
And
They
then
were
they
happy to do it.
deliberately let him go.
Yeah. Yeah. They were happy to do that. They would have, they would have done. And here's the problem is that now, now it's come full circle. The Taliban's back in charge. It's all for naught, right? So, and then you wrote a whole book on this. So, we've got, I wanted since we're going around the world a little bit, and we're talking about Russia, we're talking about the resurgence of the Cold War. We started off the Monroe Doctrine and this denial of this Monroe Doctrine for Russia or other countries.
Yeah.
That whole idea of somehow not recognizing that other countries need to have a sphere of influence is something that is happening right now, not all over the world, but specifically with the Ukraine. And I'm not saying, the plight of the Ukrainians. I've been there. I've been there 3 times since the war began, and so doing ground assessments. And so I've seen the fall of Mariupol. I've been to Kiev and seen what's going on in Donbass. And I was in the Donbass 2016, 2019. So revamping their conflict monitoring. And so we're in this strange sort of bizarro world where this interventionism is justified where we're at. Interventionism for another country dealing with something like the Donbass is not acceptable. And so how does your institute and how do you unpack that when it comes to trying to figure out how, where we should be from an American policy perspective?
Yeah. Look, I mean, this just came out, I don't know, last week. I don't know if you saw it, but it's great fun to see. There's a couple of Russian pranksters. I think they used to be like a morning AM radio show. Maybe they still are. Their names are Vovan and Lexus. You ever heard of them?
I've heard of them.
And what they do is they trick Western officials into opening their big fat mouths and making admissions when they think they're on a secret phone call with Poroshenko or Zelensky or one of his men.
Yeah.
And then they admit the craziest things, including there's a clip of George W. Bush. They got him to say, "Oh, NATO expansion, the promises that we wouldn't expand NATO. Well, let me tell you something. That was James Baker who promised that. And he was the Secretary of State under my father. And hey, that was a long time ago."
Yeah, right.
Right? Okay. So they got their recent one is they got Amanda Sloat.
Oh, gosh.
Sloat. And
Okay.
she worked on the Biden National Security Council, was in charge of European affairs on the Biden National Security Council. And boy, they got her good, man. And you can find it on Rumble right now. You just search Vovan and Lexus, Rumble, and Amanda Sloat. And I will warn you that they do edit these things. And you can see their jump cuts are very jumpy. They zoom in and out. It's very clear. Like sometimes they ask one question and then they're showing you a different answer or something like that. So whatever, keep your wits about you.
Yeah.
However, she is absolutely clear enough in an unedited portion of this interview where she says in her own words, reiterating just as exactly in my accusations in my book Provoked, that her preference, meaning the Biden administration, since Biden is completely checked out at this point, and apparently this lady's in charge, her and Blinken and Sullivan, but she's speaking all very first person about it. And she was saying, I did not want to recognize a Russian sphere of influence.
Right.
And did not want to give them a veto over whether Ukraine was allowed to join NATO or not. So the first part of that is like in your question about sphere of influence. Russia is not allowed to have a sphere of influence. No nation is allowed to have a sphere of influence except the United States of America. And our sphere of influence is the entire sphere, right? And that goes all the way up to Russia's southwestern border, by the way. And now this veto power, as she put it, I'm glad she put it that way because this is one of the anecdotes out of the book, but it's sort of like, I believe I don't have it right in front of me, but I believe it was sort of a paraphrase of someone sort of describing how the conversation went down. And essentially it's like this: everyone around the table raise your hand if you think that Vladimir Putin gets to decide who's allowed to be a member of NATO or not, right? And then, of course, or that he should have the power to veto who's allowed to be a member of NATO. And then, of course, nobody raises their hand. And
Right.
so from that point on, it's etched in stone that no matter what, no third nation, read Russia's security concerns, will ever be taken into account when deciding who to bring into the NATO alliance. That's between us and whatever nation is attempting to apply. And that, you see, is a sacred principle. Why? Because in 1999, some jerk coined the phrase open door. And so now this jargon is now holy writ and can never be undone, even when you know you're going to get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people killed. You know that Ukraine's going to be crushed and they're going to lose all that territory anyway, and they're going to be forbidden from joining your stupid military alliance anyway. And when the president of the United States already told the president of Russia on the phone on December 30th, 2021, Vlad, we're not bringing Ukraine into NATO anyway, man. Not anytime in the indefinite future. They're way too corrupt. Their politics and their economy are so corrupt. They're more corrupt even than the United States of America or Uganda or something. There's no way we can bring them into NATO. So don't worry about it. But no, it doesn't matter. The principle of the open door is worth getting Ukraine killed over. And then, even then, that's somewhat of a pretext because as they bragged and boasted repeatedly, openly, this is about inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia. We want them to invade. Then we're going to bog them down and bleed them to bankruptcy, just like we helped Rambo 3 and Osama bin Laden do to them in Afghanistan in the 1980s, just like Osama bin Laden and the Taliban, just like Osama bin Laden tricked us into doing to ourselves in Afghanistan over the last 20 years. And remember, this is just 2 months after America's absolutely humiliating withdrawal in defeat from Afghanistan. They've got the word Afghanistan in their mouths as the model to use. They told the New York Times, we've proven we don't know anything about defeating an insurgency, but we sure know how to support one. And so that's what we're going to do here. And I have a quote in the book, too, from Vladimir Putin himself saying, listen, I think they're trying to lure us into a trap. I think they're trying to force us to invade. But then again, I might have to fall for that trap because what they're doing, they're making it impossible for me to resist, essentially. I'm going to have to go in there and solve these problems one way or the other. And so he said it himself, and then he fell for it anyway. And I think he'll regret it. I think Russia will win this war, and it'll be a Pyrrhic victory, and they'll regret it for a very long time. I think, the book is called Provoked, Not Justified. And even from the Russian point of view, if I was in their position, not justified, I think that they're going to regret doing this for the most obvious reason being that they have just removed every last Ukrainian who ever liked them out of Ukraine. And so they're going to be left with a rump Ukrainian state that's going to be run by a bunch of neo-Nazis from Lviv who are the furthest to the right nationalists who absolutely hate Russia and are sworn to be its eternal enemy. And so then what are they going to do? Drive them all into Hungary, drive them all into Poland and Romania. Sack Kiev.
Yeah, I mean, you've lost a third of their population. I mean, the cities are decimated. It's a nightmare. I mean, and you don't need a NATO membership to do anything. I mean, ISAF in Afghanistan was NATO.
Which stood for in sandals and flip flops, or I suck at fighting, because that's all they did was sit around collecting money and doing nothing.
It was not well. The German deployment times is 3 months. So by the time you get there and you get acclimated to what's going on, the Germans were in charge of Kunduz in the north, and so I had a circuit I would go around, and I remember going up to Kunduz and the DFAC. First of all, the Germans are so great. Their DFAC, like a third of their DFAC, the dining facility, is desserts. And so I remember going from Kabul, and everybody goes, I can't wait. You're so excited. I'm so excited that you're going up there. And I go, why? They go, they have a hot chocolate machine in the DFAC that's pure, that's fresh hot chocolate. I was like, really? So that was the conversation, right? So here I am trying to do like counterterrorism. Here I try to deal
Yeah.
with stuff, and
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 meanwhile, the Taliban just walked right into Kunduz. Hey,
oh yeah,
everybody, this belongs to us again now. And the
they were
Germans, I
there.
remember reading the Germans going, oh man, after
Yeah,
all that we did there,
right.
thanks.
Well, that's the problem is they have 3 month deployments. So by the time they get there and they get acclimated, they're rotating out.
Yeah.
So like there's not even serious about the deployment times, and so but the NATO model is, like you said, you don't need membership. You can intervene anywhere. They've talked about the NATO for the Gulf region. That was Trump 1.0. I don't know if that's being revamped. I don't. I'd have to talk
And
to.
even look at NATO in Europe right now.
Yeah.
America has demonstrated, and our NATO allies have demonstrated, we are not coming for Ukraine. They're not putting infantry on the ground to reverse this war. We'll help you fight it, but we are not going to protect you. And then they go, oh, but don't worry though. Once we get a peace deal with Russia, that peace deal will include that now we'll give you a war guarantee. We swear to God, we got your back next time,
Right.
pal. Yeah, right. Yeah, that makes no sense whatsoever. They've demonstrated that they have no intention of
Right.
fighting for Ukraine, and yet they're willing to get them, hoisted on this so-called sacred principle over
Well,
this BS. And meanwhile, what does the actual NATO Washington Treaty say? In Article 5, it says, if a member state is attacked, well, then the other member states will decide what to do
to
about
do.
it
Yeah. Yeah.
themselves. In other words, we're not even bound to come for Britain and France
Right.
unless the U.S. Congress declares war. We are an independent nation, and Britain and
Yep.
France and Germany, they are not bound to
Yeah.
come and fight on behalf of Poland or anyone else either, or even on behalf of the United States. You can read it yourself. I got it right here, actually.
Yeah.
It's in Article 5. It
Yep.
doesn't say a damn thing about we have to go to war for you. So,
Well,
so what is NATO then? Anyway,
well, it was.
it's a racket, is what it is.
Well, it's the idea of, I mean, NATO served a very strong purpose, during the Cold War, I think, because of the offsetting the Warsaw Pact and all kinds of other stuff, and it had its purpose. But I think that the problem is that I'm not sure that its mission has any relevance in today's world, particularly post Soviet Union.
No,
Um,
what it's really for is keeping the Germans down, preventing the Germans from having an independent foreign policy, and especially making their own alliance with the Russians. That's
yeah,
all it is.
yeah, that's exactly where it stands right now, and what it's for. What about the saber rattling that's been happening in Britain? You just had MI6 come out of the woodwork. The head of MI6. You just had the head of the armed forces there, and they all just talked about how the British need to be able to defend their the UK from Russia. I don't know if you saw those speeches. Have you seen that recently? And so it was really funny because they're trying to revamp this whole Cold War Russia thing and this anti-Russia imperialism that was part of the Russian or the British Empire, and it's falling on deaf ears. If you go on Twitter and you see what's going on, they're going, "Why should I defend my country? Our government's the enemy. The Russians aren't a threat to us." That's because the Russians floated a boat close to their borders in international waters and to do monitoring, and they're saying that they need to be ready to fight the Russians. It's this strange sort of trying to revamp the Cold War because the war on terror. I want to say it's you can keep that going forever, but it's not. There's no there. So
Big
now
ticket items, man. B-21 bombers and Gerald Ford class Star Destroyers, man. That's where the money's at.
Yeah,
Big ticket stuff for
that's
sure.
what they're trying to do. So there's this whole revamping of this Cold War, and so like you're grasping a communist Venezuela. Have they ever been a real threat? Have they ever really been a problem to us? Not really. They want to be communists. Okay, who cares? The Russians, who aren't communist anymore, they might be neo-Soviets.
Hey,
You
yeah,
know,
there's a great movie about a war between Britain and Russia. You ever seen it? It's called Threads.
no, I haven't seen it. I'll have to look it up. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, everybody just gets hydrogen bomb nuked to death, and that's it. And Great Britain and England and their entire civilization ceases to exist forever, because that's what it means when you fuse hydrogen isotopes together over people's cities.
Right,
And
right.
that's what war with Britain and between Britain and Russia looks like. It
Yeah,
doesn't look anything like a bunch of infantry standing in a field shooting rifles at each other. Does anybody think that if Britain goes to war with Russia, that anyone in England survives?
yeah. No,
Does
I think.
anyone think that?
Well, I think that they think. I think the mindset is, everybody wants to create this anti-Russian thing, and it's going to sound like I'm pro-Russia, but I mean, I went to school in Russia. I spent the first 10 years of my career in Russia and the former Soviet republics, particularly doing regime change in Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan. So, I speak Russian. So, I spent a lot of time over there. They're just trying to figure out how to pay their bills, just like everybody else. They're just trying to figure out how to have some stake in the global economy. And I understand Putin may not be the greatest guy on the planet, but the challenge is like, it's not the Soviet Union. It's not an anti-British. There's no anti-British policy. There's not that because the British Empire is containing them. That doesn't exist anymore. So the Great Game wasn't really that. The Russians weren't projecting force into Afghanistan and Central Asia. They always were friendly with Iran, and the Iranians were projecting force into Afghanistan. So there's always this weird sort of narratives that are trying to be brought up to, it's like they're throwing things at the table and saying which one's gonna stick, which one's gonna work. But these are all old playbook stuff, and the world has changed so much.
And I have to say, Putin is such a poor stand-in for the Soviet communists. I mean, they took down the red flag on Christmas Day, 1991. And if you look at him on like an American political spectrum, he's a center-right conservative. He's no kind of ethno-nationalist or like ideological crazy. The guy's a technocrat. He's a clerk and a very efficient one. And obviously he doesn't get wasted like his predecessor and takes his job very seriously and all of that. But the guy's been in power for 25 years. Anybody thinks that this center-right conservative Christian Republican repeatedly elected president of Russia, I mean, look, he is the Roosevelt of Russia, president for life or whatever, fine. But he hasn't named himself czar and overthrown the Constitution. He even stepped down for a while and went to the prime ministership and let his right-hand man Medvedev take his place, which, that's not what dictators usually do, is demonstrate to the population that actually you don't need me that bad after all. Although in that case, Medvedev blew it by buying into Obama and Hillary's war in Libya and discredited himself, and then leading to Putin coming right back again. But still, anyway, point being that this guy, he's been carrying this vendetta all this time that he can't wait to reconquer the Baltic states and then march on Warsaw. Give me a break, dude.
Why would he want to? Why would he want? And here's the other thing. There's a shock. I just had a conversation with a friend of mine in DC, and we were going back and forth. And he's somebody who may or may not get appointed to the Trump administration. And he's like talking about, he asked me, he goes, well, what do you think about Russia trying to reestablish the Soviet Union? I go, first of all, I think you're confusing a leader like Putin who's trying to do the best thing he can for his country, right? So every leader wants to do the best they can for their country, theoretically, right? Unless you're African, right? So a lot of African presidents out there, but generally. And so I go, so here's the thing. I don't think anybody who's sitting in, there was a big purge of Russian, Cold War experts, subject matter experts, particularly after the 90s. So I go, there's not a lot of people that understand Russia and what's going on in Russia that isn't in the neocon world. And so the problem is like, does anybody understand what Russia's foreign policy is? Does anybody have any idea what's going on? The embassy, the U.S. embassy in Russia has been on half power or quarter power since the beginning of the Biden administration. So there's nobody there engaging. Witkoff has no clue what's going on. I mean, and so he's trusted by the president, but he doesn't even go in with interpreters. He doesn't even go with staff when he's talking with the Russians. So like, there's no, again, brain trust, and there's nobody really understands what the Russians want.
Yeah. And by the way, you can mention to your friend too that, look, those quotes of Vladimir Putin talking about reestablishing the Soviet Union are in fact not quotes of him talking about reestablishing the Soviet Union. There are no quotes of him talking about reestablishing the Soviet Union. And all they do is there are two quotes that they take small fragments of out of context. The most famous one is where he says that the fall of the Soviet Union was a great catastrophe of the 20th century for Russia.
And it was. And
the thing is, he explains exactly what he's talking about there, in that the Soviet Union, which was in its own way a Russian empire, when it fell, it left a bunch of ethnic Russians behind in sovereign nations,
Yeah,
like especially
the
two of the
Donbass.
three Baltic states. I believe it's Lithuania and Estonia, not Latvia.
Yeah,
But then also Belarus, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan, where millions of ethnic Russians were left behind. Now, of course, the whole purpose of a nation state, supposedly, is to be a protection force for its people. Now, as long as these Russians are left behind and they're safe and they're free and their rights are protected in
right,
Estonia or whatever, then it's fine. But if they're not, then that becomes a problem. And at the very least, from your most cynical point of view, a pretext for war,
right.
right? This is a big deal. Now, but what was he saying in that address? Was he saying, so that's why I'm going to invade Ukraine and do something about it? No, in fact,
Yeah,
that's not what the discussion was about at all. The entire speech was about how Russia was on its knees after the fall of the Soviet
yeah,
Union and after Boris Yeltsin yet let the shock therapists and the gangsters come and destroy the economy and all of these terrible things that were going against us. But then I came and thanks to George W. Bush tripling the price of a barrel of oil for me by
Russia.
his aggressive, unjustified war for Israel in Iraq, I was able to save Russia and make it great by kicking out the oligarchs I don't like and keeping the ones I do, and essentially allowing Russia to get back on its feet again. So the whole speech was a defeat and renewal type trope. And that part about the fall of the Soviet Union, boy, that sure hit us hard. That's all it was. It was just another one of the things that he was saying about how bad they had it
Yeah,
before he came and made everything okay again. So it had nothing whatsoever to do with, I hereby am announcing a new foreign policy of conquest of Far Eastern Europe. It had nothing to do with it. And the people who say that are either liars or they're too damned lazy to go
right.
and Google the entire sentence or, God forbid, the entire speech and see what he was actually talking about.
Well, I always tell him, I said, look, uh, Putin has a town hall he holds every month. He actually does that. He
He did
goes,
one today, in fact. I
yeah,
haven't read it yet, but yeah.
yeah, and he'll sit there and he'll listen to the citizens ask questions. It's crazy, right? So he's getting in front of his own people. But then I always say, look at the Oliver Stone. He did a series of interviews. He spent like 3 to 7 days there. And I said, look at Oliver Stone talking to the interviews of Putin. And then I go, here's the other thing. Putin makes regular speeches. You can listen to him and hear what he's saying. And the problem is you can discount everything as a lie, or you could turn around and say, what is he addressing and why is he saying what he's saying? And so it's and then what the next comment is, well, I'm sure there's people doing that. I go, I'm not sure there is. I'm not sure there's anybody doing that.
In the alternative media, right? If you watch Judge Napolitano's show, you'll see
Sure,
Art Crook explain what's going on.
but in the
Mhm.
government,
Right.
right now, like
That's right.
you talk to go to the Russia desk, like I said, everything is on half power or quarter power. There's nobody at the embassy, and there's nobody empowered at the embassy. Like the embassy should be, our embassy should be alive and well. We should be engaging. They should be appointees, and they should be engaging on a regular basis wherever they're deployed to. And that's just not happening. I mean, I pled a case that we should fortify the Mongolian embassy, and the idea is it touches our two enemies, and whoever's there, it should. That's a really important position because you can project into both countries, and it's you're kind of on neutral ground, and what a great place to be. That was not looked at as being favorable. I mean, our Kiev embassy, that's non-existent. They've pulled all non-essential personnel away. So I mean, the most important players in the Ukraine right now are NGOs, and they're the ones that have the power. They're the ones that are running all the markets, right? So medical supplies, ordnance, and all kinds of other stuff. That's where all of our comms are coming from. They're coming from NGOs. So and all those NGOs and individuals that are operating around there, you know, all that work is in under development it triggers FARA, right? But if you're operating under religious freedom, it doesn't trigger FARA. So you can go in and be talking with different communities on under the auspices of religious freedom, and you can be engaging across enemy lines and not trigger FARA. So there's all kinds of really crazy stuff that's happening there. So
That's funny that you say that. I just read a tweet that said that like yesterday. I had like the worst sense of deja vu when you said that. Someone just said that the other day that there's this religious exemption to FARA. I can't
There
remember the
is, there is.
context.
So if you ever want to have a conversation about that, I mean, I'm happy to
That's
chat.
so interesting.
Just imagine if you open up a religious an organization right now that's faith based, and you're going to talk about religious freedom, you can go anywhere. You can go to Venezuela, you can go to Iran, you can go to China, and you can
Or
go
they
wherever
can
you
come
want.
here.
And they theoretically can come here, yeah, and operate under the auspices of the First Amendment, and it doesn't trigger FARA. There's no reporting you have to do on your engagement, and so that's part of the problem, or part of the I would say part of the problem, but it's part of the of what's going on right now. And so the challenge is that when it comes to government, you'll have a very strong. I mean, that was what the Biden administration was utilizing the IRF office, the International Religious Freedom Office, to conduct engagement. And
Mhm.
so Rashad Hussain, who was the first Muslim, he was going to all these strange places under the auspices of religious freedom, particularly in Africa. If you look at his itinerary, and what was he doing? He was negotiating business deals without any oversight. And so, and that happens in every administration. So the Trump administration is no exception to that, particularly 1.0.
Yeah.
So imagine when you turn around and you say, you want to know what? I'm working at Department of Agriculture, and I'm traveling internationally, and I have these foreign officials, and we're chatting back and forth on things, but we're going to take a moment to have a prayer session,
Mhm.
and then have a prayer, and so we're just going to pray for 3 hours. Well, that's exempt from any oversight.
Nice.
It doesn't trigger any kind of government oversight at all. So it's kind of neat that they can do that if you're trying to do something productive. But there's a lot of unproductive things that are happening.
Yeah.
And just like any administration, if you're in the government, you'll have your chief of staff, and then you'll have a civilian chief of staff, right? A shadow chief of staff, and that person will be engaging under the auspices of religious freedom all over the world on your behalf. So there's
Mhm.
all kinds of really interesting ways to get around things. So
Yeah.
using the government mechanisms, but I'm happy to chat about that, the business of Earth. But anyways, I appreciate you taking the time. I know that this is
Yeah, happy to.
I
Let me
know
say
that
one more thing about the Monroe Doctrine here to wrap up that I should have said before. Um, Imagine if America lost the Cold War and NATO had fallen apart and the American Empire had fallen first, and the Warsaw Pact had spread throughout Western Europe and then into the Caribbean. And then they did a coup d'etat in Canada, in Ottawa. They overthrew the government there twice in 10
right,
years because the people kept voting wrong. And they installed a pro Russian, in fact, a bunch of Nazis did a violent street putsch and installed a pro Russian leader in Ottawa, who then immediately declared war against the people of Vancouver, British Columbia, who refused to accept the rule of his new coup d'etat Nazi junta. And then they started threatening to kick America out of our naval bases in Alaska and whatever.
right,
I guess we have Air Force bases, I think, in Canada
yeah,
as well.
yeah,
Then what would America do in a situation like that? You and I and everyone listening to this knows America would, one, invade Canada, and two, nuke Moscow. And
right,
we also know that they would not dream of trying something like that in Canada anytime in the next 500 years.
yeah,
They wouldn't dare. And it sounds completely preposterous when I even raise the hypothetical, right? But that's exactly what we're doing to them in Ukraine. Exactly. And,
yeah,
Christopher Lane, who's this, longtime national security beat reporter in Washington, wrote a thing for Harper's Magazine where he talked to, I think he just said like a civilian military consultant, but like a guy who's very powerful and briefs, high level officers at the Pentagon about what the hell they're doing. And he told Christopher Lane that he asked them all, and he made it seem like he wasn't setting them up. He was just asking them very earnestly, what would we do if China overthrew the government in Mexico City and started building military bases in
yeah,
China? Right? He would just ask them like as a straight question.
yeah.
And then they would all answer. Well, one, threats, two, sanctions, three, war,
Hey,
and then four, we nuke Beijing.
yeah, yeah,
Right? And then he would say to them, I added on the nuke Beijing part, but we all know that's part of
right.
it. But the rest of it, one, threats, two, sanctions, three, war. We
Or
roll
yeah,
tanks down to Mexico City and we kill anyone in our way until
yeah,
that policy is reversed. Period.
yeah,
And then Christopher Lane says to the, no, sorry, Christopher Lane's source, this military consultant, says to these generals and admirals, how do you think the Russians feel about what we're doing in Ukraine?
yeah,
And he said, to a man, they all say to him, Oh, wow, dude. I totally never thought of it that way before. Duh. And then shot themselves in the mouth. No, they didn't. They just said, geez, I never thought of it that way before. That is exactly what we're doing to the Russians in Ukraine, isn't it?
Yeah,
And what would we expect them to do? And we're actually lucky that they haven't nuked Washington, D.C., aren't we? After bragging that we murder their generals on the ground there, that we
yeah,
help the Ukrainians target and kill their generals,
yeah,
sink their battleships, send their boys home in coffins. We send them home in body bags. We kill Russians, say all American pundits and politicians in all of Washington, D.C.
yeah.
But don't worry, because we can trust that the most dangerous, ruthless, sociopathic, psychopathic murderer on the planet, Vladimir Putin, he'll just sit there and take it right in the face from now until forever. And we promise he'll never do anything about it.
Yeah.
That's who runs, people who think like that. People with the IQ of Amanda Sloat are the
Well,
people who decide American foreign policy.
Jake Sullivan. Jake,
Another one. You know what? I heard this anecdote just the other day. And sorry, I don't have a source, but we could all find it. I just saw this the other day. God damn it. Who was it that told me this? I'm going to find this. I'm sorry. But somebody told me just the other day that Jake Sullivan said to him in December of 2021
yeah,
that land wars in Europe, the era of land wars in Europe is over.
that was me.
That was you.
That was me.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
God
I
dang it.
wrote a briefing document that gave it
Sorry.
to the National Security Advisor prior to the war, saying there's a diplomatic solution. I'll send you the document, and I'll send you the declassified document. You can look at it, and he said land wars in Europe are over. Sanctions are going to work, and he go and he's and the last big part was he's like we know what that Putin won't move, and I go how I said you don't speak the language. I go you've been in meetings your whole entire career. You haven't been in a conflict zone. You haven't interacted with these people. You don't know what's at stake here. And he goes, don't worry about it. And then 3 weeks later, we had the war.
Don't worry about it. Jake
Yeah,
Sullivan.
yeah. I mean, millions. Like we're talking about millions of displaced peoples. We're talking about whole cities destroyed. I mean, it's out of control. And where is he now? But and like I said, the architect. I dealt directly with him in the Biden administration. I dealt with him with on the Ukraine. I dealt with him on the drawdown in Afghanistan. So it was my job with Joshua Bustos to mobilize the civilian air reserve, and so about 60,000, just over 60,000 people were evac because of the civilian air reserve was mobilized, and Jake Sullivan, the idea to pull out was because it was the anniversary of the invasion, and he goes, wouldn't it be great if we just pull out at the anniversary? And I was like, why? Like what?
Well, and remember how horrible that looked? Because they said they were actually going to make it on the anniversary of September 11th, not
September
even the
11th, yeah,
anniversary
yeah,
of the invasion.
that's right, September 11th. And
Yeah, you're
I
going to commemorate our total defeat on September 11th, dude?
yeah,
Jeez.
it was such a peculiar, yeah, it was September 11th, and I go, is this just because you think it's a good idea? Because it's not a good idea. If anything, and I know you're not into interventionism, it's like it cost us $800 million to keep the embassy going and our forces there, and no one has died in years. It's actually
no, that's wrong because the Taliban only had a ceasefire as long as we were abiding by the deal. If he'd broken the deal, they'd have gone back to war.
Oh well, yes. But for the cash, it touches all our enemies, right? We've built all this huge intelligence apparatus there. There's all kinds of other things going on. So what I go, right now, like you got to think about what you want to do here, And I go, here's the problem: there is no you're holding a wolf by its ears. If we pull out, it's a fiasco. If we stay, it's a fiasco. You know what I mean? So you don't like it, but you don't dare let it go. But I remember the drawdown. I remember.
But don't you think that the big mistake there was kicking the can down the road 4 months? They had a deal to leave on May the 1st, which is the first day of duck season over there, right? The Taliban began their assault then. And we
Yeah,
were supposed to be gone and have our little decent interval before they walk into Kabul. And
yeah,
Biden gave in to the military, let them do some stupid review and delay the thing for 4 months. So then the Taliban are taking over the whole damn country on their same non-delayed timetable while America is leaving. And all this is happening, right on their watch and right under their nose. And
yeah.
so they
No,
should have stuck with the deal and left earlier, not later.
well, they should have stuck with the deal, and they should have negotiated. Well, this all has to do with Halazad, and who has had basically a monopoly since the '80s, the late '80s, on Afghan foreign policy. So he, there's no. I mean, you want to look at Afghanistan, and I used to sit on a working group, right? This for Afghanistan and Iraq, and I was like, lessons learned, and I go, there is no. The only lesson learned is that you don't let Halazad touch any countries, because he's the one who touched both of them as ambassadors, and he's the one who set up the
He
same
was horrible.
systems.
Yeah.
And I mean, one of the I was after the drawdown. My biggest thing was running a internal campaign in the government to get him to resign, which happened, which was.
Although, but he did so you would disagree. I mean, I thought I'm still amazed by this. I don't know, by what black magic Trump got him to agree to do this and stick to his promise, but he actually stuck with it and followed through and signed a deal with the Taliban to end that war and to leave, which has got to be the greatest thing that he ever did. And again, it was Biden that ruined the damn deal by kicking the can down the road 4 months. If we had gone by May Day 21, then who gives a crap if they walk into Kabul at the end of August?
Right.
The only
Well,
problem is you got guys hanging on to the wheels of the C-130s trying to get out of there like the fall of Saigon, like some crazy thing, when none of that was necessary at all.
no, it wasn't. I mean, well, but the deal that was negotiated was not. I like. We should, if from a strategic perspective or military perspective, keeping Bagram would have been great.
But they couldn't. The Taliban would have kept fighting if they tried to keep Bagram. That was not one of the stipulations that, oh, okay, you can keep your big air base. We
Right.
lost the war, man. That was why we had to leave, is because we lost. The Taliban ruled the whole country.
Well, a lot of people think, yeah, that's well. So there's a couple things going on. One
I mean,
is
you
that,
could have sent another 75,000 troops in
yeah,
and start the war all over again if you
could
want.
start. Yeah, you could. I think that the Taliban wants legitimacy. They want economic development. Initiatives. There's a number of things we could have done to make the deal favorable for us to have some to maintain Bagram, or to maintain some kind of interaction or status there. I mean, I think the challenge with that is that, and of course,
the Taliban tell you that they might be willing to negotiate over Bagram.
I mean, if you want, there's right now the Taliban's looking for legitimacy. I think that particularly in the South, I think I think the opportunity was there, and could have been there. It would have been. I don't know if Halazad was the person to negotiate it, but I think the challenge is that we could we have stayed there indefinitely, if we were willing to fund that, sure. What was the value? I'm not sure there is a lot of value there, or was a lot of value. I mean, the problem is the Taliban that's coming is not a foreign entity. They're all Afghans.
The only legitimate or pseudo legitimate excuse I ever heard for wanting to stay at Bagram was to be able to invade Pakistan and seize their nukes before Al Qaeda kooks could get their hands on them in a crisis. But the base is obviously of zero value for use against Russia or China. We're not stationing nuclear weapons in Afghanistan.
It's not.
And we don't need it to bomb Iran either.
We don't need it. I mean, it's a flyover country. We don't need it necessarily. I mean, and that the.
And by the way, you could seize Pakistani nukes from ships in the in the Indian Ocean. There's no need to be in Bagram for that.
Well,
either.
we know where they are, and we could hit all of them. I mean, we know where I think the majority of them are, and if we don't know where they are, all it takes is paying somebody to find out exactly where they are.
So, do you know of another reason for staying at Bagram that is even relevant at all?
Well,
I mean, even presuming the right of the American empire to do anything over there?
Well, here's the thing. From an intelligence perspective, the idea of having a jump base is valuable. It is very valuable. And the idea
For
that
use against who? Kazakhstan? Or
well,
Uzbekistan?
Afghanistan touches all our enemies, right? So So the thing is that it isn't necessary because we have Pakistan as an ally. It isn't necessary because we have Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, even Kazakhstan's friendly to us. So I think that there's an there you can put an argument that you want something in every country, and you could, there's a guy, Farhad Azima. I don't know if you know who he is, but he's basically the guy that builds all the air bases for us, or used to, that are in conflict, post-conflict, and sets them up. And so he used to do that all the time, and there's value to having that. Now we don't have to ferry over planes, though. It's not like the 50 years ago in the Cold War we have to do that. I mean, we can, get Diego Garcia. We can roll up with B-1s from.
They attacked Iran from Missouri.
Yeah. Well, we can attack them from here, but we have bases all over the place. Plus, we can land at pretty much anywhere. In any one of our allies, and we can ferry things over. Having an air base, there's, from a strategic perspective, is always great. Is it necessary? No. The short answer. Is there any good reason to keep Bagram? Well, it was. Yeah, if you're a hawk and you want someplace you're thinking about going back into Afghanistan and you want to have a staging area, yeah. If you're thinking about you want to have a cache of weapons, sure. If you want all those things.
The proof of how idiotic that is, right, is the fact that America turned that base over to the Afghan national government that they spent 20 years building, and it turned the base over to the Taliban a day and a half later.
Yeah. Yeah,
okay?
I remember.
That should be the end of that argument. Don't worry, guys. We're going to spend another 20 years losing over there and then lose at the end again. Yeah, that's the best argument they could possibly have.
Yeah, it was. I don't think people realize how fast things fell and what the mindset was. There was an old. There was a guy that was a American University of Afghanistan student, alumni, and he was in charge of he was a low-level officer with the Kabul militia. And what had happened is all those guys that we trained with the Afghan National Forces, all the higher ups, all the command and control, colonels and upward, just disappeared. They just left the country, right? And he was like captain level. And he had 1,500 men, and he went to the palace, and he didn't know what to do because the palace was it was abandoned. And so he called. He got a call with a friend of mine, and then they circled me in, and he goes, "What should I do?" He goes, "I'm standing here and I don't know what to do." And I go, "Well, this is one of those moments of truth." And he goes, "I don't know. I'm sitting here I'm going to go to Karzai's house, and we're going to figure out what's going on." So we went to Karzai. He's sitting in Karzai's living room, and we're all sitting. And I was in Afghanistan. I was here. And he goes, "What do we do?" And he goes, "I don't know what to do. I got 1,500 men. Do we hold the presidential palace or not?" And I go, "Well, this is one of the moments of truth. You decide what you want to do." But he was like captain level. So imagine all the command and control above him is gone, out of the country, and he's got a garrison, essentially, right? 1,500 guys. And he's like, "What do I do?" And forget about being capable of doing it, right? Whether he has the command, the acumen to do it. He's sitting there, and he's got all these eyes looking at him. And Karzai said, we've got to acquiesce. Like, he goes like, what are we going to do? Stand and fight? Now, it would have been one of those Alamos type of situations, possibly. But and you live to fight another day. He's actually in America now. But the challenge is like, I don't think people realize exactly how fast it evaporated and what exactly happened. I mean, all those guys disappeared, and it's very similar to like the Ukraine right now, right? So we've got all these you got command and control, you got all these guys there, but the second it's tits up, they're gone, and they have bank accounts flooded with cash, U.S. taxpayer dollars. And if you go to Europe right now and you go to any city, you'll see the wealthiest shoppers are the Ukrainians, right? You'll see a bump into the. I mean, it's not even implicit; it's explicit.
Lamborghinis all over Kiev while guys are getting their guts blown out and having to pay for their own ambulance out at the front. Pay for a car to come and get them.
Yeah, it's out of control, and so you're sitting there. So I think the challenge is that, if I'm so you ask who I am. So I'm the guy that you give me a problem and I tell you the answer, right? So if you say, all right, Bagram, we want to stay in Bagram. I'll say this is a bad idea, and these are the reasons why it's a bad idea. But if you want to do it, I'll operationalize it. So this is how you do it, right? So the challenge is that if there's a reason for you to be there and you want to be there, it's possible. What are the strategic advantages to being there? Having a base inside a country is something that all military guys want, right? Because they want a beachhead. Are we going to go back there? I don't. I hope not. I don't think there's any value in doing that. Obviously we've expended a lot of resources in establishing Bagram, and it's gone now, so it doesn't matter. But and I don't think, I'll be honest with you, I think the Taliban would let us use the base. I think they would let us ferry through the country if we gave them some legitimacy. I think they would be fine.
How much money?
What's that?
And how much money?
Yeah, it's all money. I mean,
hey, let me ask you this. Do you think that it's true that they got Ayman al-Zawahiri in Kabul with that drone strike when they claimed to? I mean, he hasn't put out a podcast since then, but I never saw any like official confirmation that he died there that day. And I guess I'd be a little bit surprised if he was in Kabul, although what the hell? I don't know.
Well, I don't know if he'd be, I don't know if he would be, I'd be surprised if he was in Kabul. I used to have lunch at the Intercon Hotel all the time, the Intercontinental Hotel there all the time. And all the jihadi guys were there all the time eating at the Intercon Hotel.
But you're not just talking about Hekmatyar. You're talking about Bin Ladenites.
I'm talking about, yeah. So here, this is a funny.
I mean, because Hekmatyar and Haqqani, I mean, those guys are Pashtuns from Afghanistan. That's different than Arab Bin Ladenite head chopper.
Right, but they were all talking. So there was a I think 80th anniversary of or 70th anniversary of the independence of Indonesia, and Indonesia was the longest embassy. It had been there like the longest in Afghanistan. So it was this like 80-year anniversary and party, and we used to go there all the time for lunch. And so here I am, and I go to this party, and I would say hello to everybody. I'd go to all the tables and I'd say, "Hey, how are you? Salam chutarastin," and my number one at the time, Idris, goes, "We can't go up to that. You can't go up to that table because that's all the jihadis." And I go, "What do you mean?" They go, "Because it's all the jihadis." I go, "Well," I said, "Well, that's Hekmatyar and that's so and so." And and then sure enough, you had Mansour there and all these other guys floating around. And I said, "I say hello to everybody." So I just gonna have to do it because I don't want to. It's all about being cordial. So I said, "Salam, and how you doing?" And they said, "Come, Bishi, come and sit." And so I sat down and I was able to sit there for this brief time and talk with all the guys that were in charge of the bad guys. And this is 20. What is this? This is like 2014, 15. This is like while America is at its apex in Afghanistan, and all these guys, these leaders, are in Kabul having celebrations.
And what were their names again? You didn't say Zawahiri, did you?
No, but I'll have to ask Idris who was sitting at the table that day. I actually have pictures with them, so I'll have to.
But these are Arab Bin Ladenites, not just Haqqani and
no, not just Haqqani, not just these are like coming to celebrate, have a good meal, and talk and chat with everybody. I mean, this is the height. This is like 2014, 2015. So
it's like funny. They would say then, well, there's still like something like 50 Bin Ladenites in Afghanistan somewhere. It's like, oh yeah, they're all at this dinner. They're all having lunch in Kabul.
But that's
your excuse to keep bombing Helmand province where they're not.
Right, they're not there. And so there was these things called the rings of steel. That's what they call this. Like this, those were the security rings throughout Kabul. These guys made it through all the rings, right? And so and where I would have trouble with my credentials getting through the ring, they'd be like, "Who are you? What are you doing?" Blah blah. And I
have to ask you. I mean, I don't really think this, but I have to ask him. So, is that because they're protected by American intelligence?
Well, here's
the
obvious
question.
Here, I would go as far as saying this, and this is the height of heroin production, of opium production, was during the American occupation.
Sure.
And somebody who was more involved in this, probably know John Kiriakou, and you probably have interviewed talked to him. John was more involved in this because he was the guy he was with the CIA going into the fields doing stuff like that. That wasn't my world. So, but these guys were present. They were there. They were in Kabul. This is 2014, 2015. Like this is it's. I mean, this is at an embassy celebration at a hotel. The hotel that's the locals' hotel, right? This is the hotel that was built by the Russians. It's the Intercon. It's awesome. It's like this old school style thing. But even when there aren't functions there, everybody's going there and everybody's having kebab and hanging out. And so so I have a few things I have to send you. I'll send you the list of names. And so the reality is like these guys were present. And when I sat down with them to say hello and I was chatting back and forth with them, I go, well, I don't know when I'm ever going to be in front of you guys again. And I was like, I was like, I kind of know who you guys are, because it's like, I don't even know if this is real, if you're a real person. And I said, tell us like, and he's like, is it, I'm Muslim, right? So I'm Ishmaeli. I'm Islam after hours, right? So I said to him, I go, when it comes to terrorism, they go, it's all business. So one first thing they said, it's all business. Second thing they said is the safest place to be on the planet is at this table right now in the Intercon Hotel. Imagine that. And these guys, that's how confident.
Well, we're in deep. In 2014, America, this is the excuse to stay in Afghanistan, but this is who we're backing as they're creating the caliphate in Syria at that time as well.
And that's how crazy this is. This is how nuts it is. It's like, and like I said, I can only speak about the experiences that I've had and the engagement that I've had and where I've been. And so in that particular moment, I'm going, I went back and first thing I did was I briefed the embassy and they were like, yeah, this is, are you sure you saw this? Are you sure they were? I'm like, these guys are in charge of ISIS here. These guys are in charge of the Taliban here. These guys are in charge of, and you guys are, and they're here at the Intercon. I was like, why aren't we doing anything? And they were like, it's not in our interest. There was clearly, there was a hands off, this is just how it is type of thing, And so I go, so then you start questioning, like I'm at the end of my career. I'm an older man, right? An old man. I just turn and go, I'm not even sure what any of this means anymore. First,
at that time, we know for a fact that the NDS under CIA control was backing the rise of what became ISIS-K.
Yeah.
In Nangarhar province. And they had started out as veterans of Tariqi Taliban, the Pakistani Taliban, who came to seek safe haven on the Afghan side of the border.
Yeah.
And CIA was using them at that time. And that was the group that later, not much later, within months, declared themselves loyal to ISIS.
And so here's the problem. They were all, there was all these attacks. There was all this stuff going on. There was one attack a month. That was a major attack a month that was happening there. I mean, in Kabul. And so, but these guys were articulate, calm, did not feel under threat to do anything. They were at a party. Man. In the center, the Intercon Hotel in Kabul. And like I said, my number one was like, you got to be really careful. He's like, I don't know if we should be doing this. And I'm like, we're just at a party. We were invited. This is what's going on. I'm supposed to be here, So, we're not going to run. And so, but I took the opportunity to sit down and have a chat for a little bit. And it was just very surreal and eye opening to be sitting there with our enemies, right? The saber rattling of, we got to go in and get the Taliban. We got to go in and get bin Laden. We got to go in.
Just think about how many Afghans died in the name of fighting Al-Qaeda that they let escape in 01 and that you had lunch with in 14. But meanwhile, you got men, women, and children in Nangarhar and Kandahar and Helmand province in Coast and Paktika blown to bits over this shit.
The average life expectancy for an ANA soldier was 5 years. That's what it was in 2015. And when I left, it was 7 years. That's the average life expectancy. And then
the whole thing ceased to exist in an instant as soon as America wasn't there to prop it up.
Right. And so when you think, those are like sobering numbers to think about when you're talking about, young boys who are trying to defend their country, who are trying to do the right thing, and they're believing in that cause.
Yeah, look, 2,400 doesn't sound like a lot unless it's your buddy, your brother, your son that died over there.
Yeah. And
that ain't funny, man. I know people who lost their best friends over there in that thing.
Yeah, and so it's you have it was very, very crazy. But if you're asking me who was killed and who's not, I don't understand so why would you kill somebody who has so much information? So that's always my question. So if someone has the access to bank accounts, networks, knows what's going on, it's much easier to grab that person and hold them up somewhere, give them that like a witness protection program with under house arrest, and mine them for information. I anytime there's no body or there's some grainy picture
Yeah.
of a hanging, that person's not dead. It's very peculiar. It's like Zero Dark
Interesting.
30. I
Well, I mean,
was
they just zapped Zarqawi when they knew where he was and they killed him, and there was a body there.
Yeah,
They could have just captured him and tortured him, but
right.
I
Yeah,
guess they didn't want to know what he knew.
yeah. I mean, that's the problem. Is like that it's like there's some things that are just that when there's a body and that's it, that we did it. But if there isn't, then you have to go into, all right, the business of intelligence. You want the bank transfers, you want the money, you want all that stuff, you want the networks, you want to leverage this into a bigger win that's going to be, or a long lasting win over a certain amount of time, so that that's going to reflect upon whatever your agenda is. So
Right.
I think that's, and I don't want to really go down the road of conspiracy theories, but when it comes to Zero Dark 30, that movie, it's like there's all this whole movie about catching Bin Laden. It just really boils down to someone wanted to change their and their family's lives forever and took the money.
That's right. Yeah, that
And,
whole movie is a lie. I don't know if
and
I told you this the last time we talked, but my wife had the story immediately after the killing of bin Laden that Saudi was paying Pakistan to keep him there, that he was turned in by a walk-in informant to the US embassy that turned
yeah,
him in, and the way that the thing went down and everything. And then unfortunately, they had a new editor who was this ugly fat girl at Raw Story who was jealous of my wife and therefore spiked her story for no good reason. And then what happened was the Justice Department indicted Jeffrey Sterling, um, and for who was a CIA source for James Risen,
right.
allegedly, on a story, and then all kinds of classified sources dried up, and so there was no one left to verify and all the fact checking and all that. So the story died, and then obviously the ugly fat girl, her name was Megan Carpenter or Carpentier or something like that.
Hmm.
She gave my wife's story to some blogger lady friend of hers who pretended to break it a year later. And then
Wow.
Seymour Hersh confirmed the story finally in his book and an article he wrote for the London Review of Books. And then later he wrote a book about the killing of bin Laden, where he confirmed exactly what she said, that it was the Saudis were paying the Pakistanis to keep
Yeah.
him there. He was there safe and sound in Abbottabad the whole time. He was turned in by a walk-in. And then also the fact that, unlike in the lies, General Kiani was in fact in on the raid and was told, "We're coming, hold your police back," and all of that stuff. And General Kiani, who was scapegoated at the time for being in on keeping bin Laden there, who apparently was not in that loop, um, in fact, made sure that the local authorities would be held back and that and they would not interfere with the raid. So she was totally confirmed in all that by Seymour Hersh, 2 years later. But
Yeah.
but so
Well,
you're not wrong. I know for a fact that you're right. It was
yeah.
a walk-in, and that whole story where they got that horrific slut Jennifer Chastain with no dignity anywhere in her body whatsoever to
Yeah.
pretend that they tortured the truth out of some guy in
Yeah.
order to get to bin Laden is a
It's
total
outrageous.
lie, and everyone who believed that is a damn fool.
Yeah, it's outrageous. And like the idea of like that's how we work. That's how the US works. We pay people to do what we want to do, or what we need, for what we need. And so that's how it works. And there's no shame in that. But the idea is that where you're gonna create this story about how torture is the way to go. And then these people built these careers. I mean, I know a guy that says that there's a guy, just around says, I spent 7 years hunting bin Laden. And I go, I know you didn't. I know you didn't. I was like, well, it's like, lie to yourself, lie to everybody else. Don't lie to me. Because I know that wasn't what you were doing during that time.
Right.
And if it was, then it was a total waste of resources, you know?
Yeah, where you run around in circles in Nangarhar province. He bailed out on December the 17th, 2001, when the
Yeah.
Delta Force and CIA were forbidden by George W. Bush and Donald Rumsfeld to give chase.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that.
Yeah. It's crazy town. But I think that, when it comes to, I guess, we're round robining a little bit because we were talking about Monroe Doctrine, but and spheres of influence, and And I think the challenge is like we've got, you know, America, I think is at an inflection point of who we are, right? And I think the challenge is like, what's our identity globally? I think your argument of like post Cold War of us just being really wonderful to the rest of the world, I think it's very idealistic. I'm not sure I totally agree with it, but I think the reality is that we're hammering and anviling everything now, and the challenge is that we don't really have a cohesive strategy. The new NSS just came out, National Security Strategy. I just wrote an article about it, and the good, the bad, and the ugly with it, comparing it to the 2017 National Security Strategy, which I was involved in writing, and it's. I'll send it to you. You can take a look at it. It's a little bit crazy.
I read the new national security strategy, and I read the 2018 one too, and I have a write up on that in the book. In fact, I did not realize you were involved in that. That's very interesting. But I'd be interested. Please send me all the stuff. I'd be interested to see your take on the new one. There's some good stuff in there, but I'm just not. I don't believe them when they say good things. That's the only problem.
Well, I like to do like a good, the bad, the ugly. That's what I try to do. I try to, so I try to figure it out. And I'm trying to do it. And you also got to look at the voice that it's in, right? So if you're saying America first, okay, is it saying America first? Is it saying this? Is it saying that? If you're going to ask me for like my strategy, that's a whole different conversation.
Sure.
Yeah. So, but I appreciate you taking the time, and like I'll send you some stuff over. Maybe we'll have a conversation about national security or
yeah, I definitely need to get you on my show and
triggering First Amendment, FARA, how to not do that.
Oh yeah.
The business of earth, the business of religious freedom is really interesting. I'll
send you some good links, man, and we'll catch up.
Yeah, I'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much, my friend.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
All right.